plant material and bugs, those kinds of things. And we call them upland game because that's just the term we use in the hunting realm. You go in for your upland game tag or license or whatever you want to do. This is a male greater sage grouse. This is that big white collar becomes very prominent in the breeding season. They actually inflate that and it becomes very obvious, and that's because they're trying to attract females visually. They make a noise and they're dancing and displaying in a group on a lek, it's called. And a bunch of males get together and do their little dance. It's like prairie chickens if you're from the Midwest. Same thing. They're displaying, but it's that white visual thing that they're trying to get the female's attention with, because they're making a popping noise, but it's not like a robin singing a song to attract a mate. This is going to be a visual attraction. And then it's just kind of loose skin, and then when the breeding season goes away, it's just kind of hanging there. And I don't know if you guys follow the whole sage grouse thing, but big controversy about whether sage grouse are going to be listed under the Endangered Species Act. And Idaho is bound and determined, along with Wyoming and Montana, that not happen, that they not get listed. And so as a result, are bringing in the ranching community, the ag community to say, we've got to do something. You guys you've got to be at the table, and you've got to commit to helping sage grouse, because otherwise it's going to be listed. And if it gets listed, there would be some serious constraints on agriculture in places where they overlap. So that's all happening right now. I mean, it's to the point where our congressmen in Washington, D.C. are passing legislation that forbids the Fish and Wildlife Service to make decisions on sage grouse. I mean, that's how political it is. It's crazy. But there should have been a decision this fall. They actually passed a law that said the Fish and Wildlife Service cannot make that decision this fall. They have to take another year before they make that decision. And Idaho has a plan, and it's all okay. As a result, lots of money goes to sage grouse right now. So should I desire to work on sage grouse, I probably would have some funding. There's enough people working on sage grouse. The closest sage grouse we know of to McCall is down in the Midvale, Crane Creek, Weiser area. There's this population there that is completely distinct, shouldn't they say distinct, disjunct, meaning it's not connected to any other population in the West, especially in Idaho. Every other sage grouse population in Idaho is sort of part of this big swath, but you've got this one group in what we call West Central area that's all by itself, and it's going down the tubes for sure. Now there is some indication that there's some occasional connection with Oregon, sage grouse in Oregon. They're flying across the Snake River, Hell's Canyon, and we've had birds move both directions in winter in both states, but that's not enough to keep our population going. Did you have a question?
When we were doing a shorter owl survey, was that last week, we talked with the guy on the road that said there was a sage grouse study group that Fish and Game had out there.
We were out east of Midvale.
Yeah, we were in that Crane Creek.
Yeah. Oh. They were doing sage grouse. Well, they were doing a lek route probably. Was it in the morning sometime?
Well, he said he'd just seen them out there and didn't want to say what.
Yeah. So we still monitor the leks, even though the population's going down tubes. We have 14 leks that we monitor in the breeding season, and what you're doing is these leks are where all the males come and congregate, and so you're counting. There's a whole protocol. You did them 4 times, and you're getting the maximum number you see at one time, and tracking that over years. But we did telemetry work on sage grouse down there for, 7 years or something like that. Yeah, we'll actually talk about sage grouse again in another context. Okay, another group of birds, the passerines. This is a huge group of birds, and it's everything from hummingbirds to crows to woodpeckers. And if you look at all these pictures, except for the bird in flight, what do you see them doing? They're perching on something. And this is another name for the passerines. They are our perching birds. So if we start from the left, guesses on the woodpecker? Pileated with the bright red head. To the right of that, a hummingbird. What color is it? Brownish. Rufus. Okay, good. See, you guys can do this. The other one you've seen before. Tree swallow. Lower right. Mountain bluebird. We have two. And then that is a raven in flight. Okay, so here's the passerines. These are our true songbirds. These are the ones that make all the beautiful noises, this group of birds. And it includes birds that don't make beautiful noises too, but in general, these are the singers. These are the songsters. These are the perching birds. This is where most of our neotropical migrants fall into this group, and we're going to talk about them again a little bit later on, but they're in this group as well. They are insect eaters primarily, but also some vegetation, probably some snakes and stuff too if they could get their hands on them. Important for seed dispersal, important for pollination, all those sort of ecological roles. In the sort of R versus K life history strategy, they are kind of in the middle. They don't lay a lot of eggs, but things happen very quickly when they lay eggs. Their nestlings don't stay in the nest for 2 months, like the large birds of prey, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah. And this is the most recent group of birds. We talked about loons and grebes being ancient birds. The passerines are the most recent evolutionarily group of birds. So, song. Let's talk about bird vocalization. Right? It's got a function. It takes a lot of energy to make some of those songs, and so why would you suppose a bird would choose to do that? Everything in the wildlife world is a choice. You know, you're making a sort of a cost analysis. What's the cost benefit sort of thing? What's the trade-off? So if you're going to invest a lot of energy in song, what's that getting you? What's the trade-off there? What's the benefit to singing? Yeah, it's going to help you in your quest to replace yourself as many times as you can. So it's helping to advertise for a mate. That's one of the key things. It's also advertising to potential competitors that this is my place. I'm here. I own this patch of shrubbery. And don't come in here because I've already got it staked out. And therefore, if I'm nesting in here, you stay away. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's not. Many times it's not. There's really fascinating research that has gone on looking at parentage of a lot of songbirds because we assume that once they establish a nest, you know, that male is mating with that female and all those offspring are his. Well, no, they're not. Even with a lot of common birds like warblers and robins and that kind of thing. You have these interloping males, you've got females not behaving themselves, you know, that kind of thing going on out there. Yeah. So let's talk about who sings in the bird world. And I'm not saying which birds, but of the pair, who sings? The male sings, almost exclusively.
Common for the female, right?
He sings for these reasons we talked about, to establish, you know, to sort of advertise himself for the female and for competitors. It doesn't mean that the female doesn't make noises, because she does. But she typically communicates with calls. So there's a difference between a song and a call. And all birds have both. Sometimes it's very hard to say, is that really a song? That's pretty pathetic for a song. It's more like a call. Like a bald eagle doesn't sing, it only calls, and even that is amazingly weak and pathetic. But of the ones who really have elaborate songs, they usually have multiple other vocalizations as well that they use to communicate with their mate or their young, perhaps. So call notes are very common. But they're much harder to distinguish, of course. A song you can learn, the bird can learn it, we can learn it to identify the bird. Call notes are harder because they sound a lot more similar across bird species. So the female is communicating with calls, the male is singing and using call notes. And because of this high energetic cost, it's why we don't typically hear singing going on all day long. You get a few birds that are just obnoxious about it, like mockingbirds and that kind of thing. But typically, it's what we call the morning chorus. You wake up in the morning, everybody's going. It's why we do bird walks in the morning. You know, because then by 10 or 11, things quiet down. Those birds need to spend their time doing something else. They have to go feed themselves. They have to be feeding their young. They have to be busy doing other things. They can't just spend all day singing. So that's why we kind of have this sort of, this definite change during the day. And when you're doing bird research and you're using vocalizations as your way of detecting birds, you have to keep that in mind, because you have to say, I can't do a very efficient survey if I'm going to go out at noon, right, to count birds by hearing them, because they're not singing. So that's not a good way of collecting data. Learning vocalizations is also a key part of what a bird does, a young bird does. They're going to be absorbing what they hear in the environment, and if they're going to be successful in being a robin versus a tanager versus a bluebird, they have to know their own song, right? Because the female, the adult female, when they come back to nest, is going to be listening for the best song. And if she hears something that's kind of not right, she's not going to pick him. Because that's a reflection of subpar. You know, you gotta be the best if you're going to collect, be the best at reproduction. So it's important for young birds to learn the right song, but it is a learning process. And when they first try it, they are not good at it. I don't know if any of you have ever had the opportunity to be looking at a bird and saying, I know what you are, but the voice you're making is, or the song you're making is not right. And it's because they're learning. I mean, even this past winter I had, or last fall I had young great horned owls in my yard, and they were trying to hoop, which is pretty basic, right? It's just a hoop, but they didn't have it right. I mean, it's a 5-note hoop, and they had it all mixed up. I mean, they were putting the emphasis on the wrong one, and yeah, it's fascinating, but it's definitely a learned experience. And then you have the birds who are so good at it that they mimic other birds. Starlings, you know, we have a bazillion starlings around here. They are mimics. They make their own little hoots and whistles and stuff, but they are mimicking other birds also. So I have a starling in my neighborhood who does a really good meadowlark, because there are meadowlarks in the pasture. And of course they can do like hawk screams, that kind of thing, just like jays can. But it also does a really good Sora rail, which is a very unusual bird. I mean, we have this wetland I referred to has soras in it every summer, and they have just this weird thing. It's like if you ran your fingers down across the comb, down the teeth of the comb, it kind of goes down like that. That's their call. That's their song. And this starling has learned that. So you're hearing this sora, which is a wetland bird coming, you know, from this tree up here. It's very fascinating. So yeah, so you have mimics in there who can learn better than anybody else, have the capability to learn songs. And that kind of screws up things out there in the woods, right? Yeah.
And what's the advantage of them learning to mimic?
You know, that's a good question. There's probably no reproductive advantage. It's just something that maybe they have more spare time, I don't know.
Maybe for territory or something?
Well, even that. There's got to be, because everything has a reason. But it's a good question, Francis. I'm not sure why they would know that. I'm going to do a little research on that. What are some of our other mimics that you guys might be familiar with?
The jays.
Jays. Stellar's jays, blue jays back east. But the classic Stellar's jay doing a red-tailed hawk call, you know. You have to listen carefully sometimes because they can get really good at that. So we'll talk, this is one of my favorite quotes about birds. Because when I think about bird migration, it always it flabbergasts me. There's no other group, other than bats maybe, and monarch butterflies now, we're learning so much more about that. But when you think of the distances that birds will travel during migration, I mean, we don't have the equivalent of that in a large mammal. I mean, deer and elk migrate, sure, they migrate seasonally, but they're not going very far. I mean, they're staying within, you know, a couple counties probably in Idaho. But when you think about what birds do, it's just, to me, it's quite amazing that you would be able to, and you have birds that, individual birds that will make this tens of thousands of mile round trip migration and come back to the exact same spot. I mean, how does that happen? It just, to me, that's just amazing. So we'll talk about migration a little bit. So typically what we talk about is movement between North America and South America. And that's this area right here, central and the northern part of South America, is called the neotropics, the near tropics, and that's where most of our North American birds wind up when they migrate. So you have birds in South America that live there year-round, right? So if you were a bird, how did this migration thing with birds ever get started, do you suppose? What was the impetus for doing that? Remember we talked about there's always a reason. You've got to do something. It's got to benefit you in some way. Food. So if you've got competition in South America, you may decide to take the risk and go north and take advantage of this flush of insects that happens up here every spring and summer, and that risk of the flight is outweighed by the benefit that you now have less competition from what you would have in South America. You can establish a territory, you can raise young, there's a food supply for them, and then you make this return trip back. It means, though, you have to make the return trip back because that food supply you're depending on is not there year-round, right? So you have to decide that you're going both ways. So we have this whole suite of species that do this migration. And we have lots of birds in Idaho and North America that don't migrate. Woodpeckers, most woodpeckers, chickadees, nuthatches, you know, some of the raptors, owls, some of the owls. So clearly you don't have to, but obviously there's an advantage for some birds to do it. So for us, for birds in the western part of the U.S., they typically go down to either Mexico or the western part of Central America. Birds in the east that migrate are going to the Caribbean, this part of Central America, and funneling into South America. Swainson's hawks, for example, that we have up here in the breeding season. All the Swainson's hawks in North America go to Argentina for the winter. It's just where they go. And unfortunately, there are some issues with that because South America still uses pesticides, and there was a big die-off of Swainson's hawk about 10 years ago where they were getting pesticide contamination because they're all in one place. I mean, that's the bad part. They're all in one general place. Ospreys are migratory, right? We only have them here this summer because they eat fish. And it gets cold here and everything freezes. So they have to leave. And so typically our ospreys go to Mexico. And ospreys in the east have to go to the Caribbean. You know, they could just go far enough where there's open water, right? You would think, why have to go all that way? Like, think about the birds in the east. Why do you have to go to the Caribbean? You could stop in Florida, say. But there's a resident population of osprey in Florida. So the migrating ospreys have to leapfrog over the resident population, and they continue on down to the Caribbean. Okay. So there are some birds that migrate huge distances, and the Arctic tern is probably the best example of the longest distance. It's going a round trip of almost 25,000 miles every year. And Arctic terns are not big, this big. And they feed on fish, so they've got to store up and gear up to go. Then we have birds that we call, that would be a long distance migrant. Then we have short distance migrants, and a robin is a perfect example of that. That is a bird that will go as far, only as far as it needs to